Alright, I am back with another build, and today we're doing another build inspired by the From Software Soulsborne game series. Today we're doing Godfrey from Elden Ring, the First Elden Lord. Obviously, for people still playing through Elden Ring, this boss is kind of like spoilers, but again, this is from the base game, which has been out for a while now, so no DLC spoilers here, so feel free to watch this video, without having to worry about the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC being spoiled for you. But regardless, we're talking about Godfrey today, one of the most memorable bosses from the base game, in my opinion, one of my personal faves, and was one of the ones here that was the easiest to turn into a fun build. Obviously, this is riding off the same sort of idea that came from my Lady Maria-inspired Bloodborne build from, I believe it was last week, I believe it was last Monday, which did extremely well, so I kind of wanted to carry over that same energy into this video, with the fact that we're going to be making a character that actually works like a boss fight with their own stage transition. Now, whereas in the other video I had 3 stages of transformation, I've gone for only 1 and 2 here, since Godfrey himself only has 2 phases, and honestly, it worked out super well. And I think the way that the quote-unquote phase transition worked is going to really surprise some of you, because while it is a bit in-depth, it actually really does capture the essence of the character quite well. And as far as the looks go, obviously I can't replicate Godfrey very well at all in Baldur's Gate. This is all done with vanilla equipment and dice, by the way. If you are modding, you would have a better chance, but here I thought I'd get something that was at least a close approximation, so you at least know who I'm going for. But obviously, when it comes to fashion stuff, just do whatever you want with this build. This build is just meant to be based on the character, but it doesn't have to be the character. Just use it as a guideline for making a build like this. And I'm just going to say it now, again, the combat footage will be playing, so you probably have already kind of know what I'm going to be doing, but this build, oh, it's so fun. It's fairly simple, but when you actually get down into it and play it, it's so fun. And actually doing the phase transition part of this build is just, like where you get powered up and you go into like your phase 2 and you're just super strong. It's so good, because Godfrey himself in the games is deliberately limiting his own power in his first phase. The lion that he has, the lion kind of spirit, Serosh, that he has grafted onto his back, is literally just there to make it so he is not as strong as he otherwise would be. So the fact that you actually kind of feel like you are nerfing yourself a bit on purpose whilst when you initially start combat, only to go even crazier once you reach the HP threshold, it just feels so good. And it's not like a complete one-to-one rip-off of my original build either. The way we go about doing this like 2-stage boss fight character is completely different than the other build. So please stick around for this. I really hope you'll enjoy it, and let's get into the build. First up, we are going to be kicking things off as a Barbarian. Those of you who have played Elden Ring and fought this boss know exactly why I'm doing this. Starting off as Barbarian, we're going to get everything we want. We're going to get simple and martial weapons. Great, because we're going to be using a greataxe with this build. We're getting access to unarmored defense, as well as light armor and medium armor, as well as shields. We are going to be using 2-handed weapons with this build, so we're not going to really need shields, but having access to those armor pieces is quite nice, although we will be using unarmored defense with this build. And as well, of course, we're going to get access to Rage. Basically, this is going to be part of our Phase 2 transition, similar to the original build. However, the way it is used in this build is completely different, but obviously Rage is going to allow us to deal a bit of extra damage with our melee and improvised weapons, as well as throwing, and is going to give us resistance to physical damage types, that being bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing. So overall, as soon as you start raging, once your HP gets a bit low and you've taken a few hits, and thanks to our Barbarian levels, we have a very high hit die, so we're going to have a lot of HP with this build, you're just going to feel so extremely tanky, which is, again, another great part of these kind of boss battle builds. I definitely am going to do more boss battle builds, I think, in the future. Just the idea of having a character that kind of switches modes mid-combat, or maybe even has a kind of a style switching mechanic, like my old Devil May Cry builds, is definitely something I want to experiment more. Obviously, maybe going outside of the realm of FromSoft bosses, so let me know if you have any ideas. Next up, ability scores. This one is going to be pretty standard for a Barbarian. I've gone for a 17 in strength, because we are going to be using a half feat to bump this up later. Dexterity is at 14. This is all that we need for it. It's the most you're going to get out of most medium armor sets, but since most of our unarmored defense here is going to come from our constitution, and I'd rather level that up to have a higher HP pool, dexterity being at 14 is just fine. It is going to suck a little bit for the initiative rolls, but that's okay. Godfrey does start off his fight a bit slow. Next up, Constitution. It is going to affect our AC and our HP pool, so we definitely want this as high as we can get it. Intelligence is at 8, we don't need it. Wisdom is at 10, so it's not completely abysmal, and Charisma is at 8 because this is not meant to be a face of the party. But feel free to put that 10 into any of these that you desire. Next up, our skill proficiencies. I've gone with the soldier background here for athletics and intimidation, as well as I've picked up religion because we are playing a human, so I got a free racial skill proficiency. And I went with religion because Godfrey's whole thing is like being a part of the Golden Order, which was a big religious thing in Elden Ring and yada yada yada. It just made sense in my head, but put that anywhere. I've gone with animal handling because, well, again, he did kind of have a lion in his service, like a big lion spirit, so animal handling made sense for me lore-wise, and I've gone with perception because it's a decent skill to have. Let's keep going. Next up, at Barbarian Level 2, we're going to get access to a couple of things. Number 1, Danger Sense, giving us advantage on dex saves against traps, spells, and surfaces. So that being able to resist spell damage is actually pretty nice, as well as being able to resist well, I say spell damage, like things that use a staving throw, so like Fireball, for example. That's whatever. But no, Danger Sense is okay. But the main thing here is Reckless Attack, allowing us to give us advantage on all attack rolls, but enemies also have advantage against us as a result. We're not going to be making as much use of this in this build, because we don't really need it all of the time, but if you're going to miss, you can trigger it as a reaction, so you might as well use it. Next up, at Barbarian Level 3. Now, those of you who have played Elden Ring are probably expecting me to go with Wildheart here, because again, with Wildheart, we would have access to an animal heart, which again, for making a Godfrey build, does feel on theme. But the thing is the closest thing we can get to a lion is a tiger, and we used that last time, and I don't really think it works out for us here. Bear heart, though, would absolutely make sense if you wanted to get resistance to all damage types and a bit of healing. It would be a nice overall option for you, but my personal choice is going to be Berserker. Now, again, those of you who have played Elden Ring will know where I'm going with this, but Godfrey in his second phase basically rages out like a barbarian, rips his shirt off, or his armour I guess, to be shirtless, which, don't worry, I've got that in this build as well. We have a way to become shirtless mid-combat without spending any resources. It's awesome. And also we gain access to the frenzied actions, namely Frenzied Strike, allowing you to make a melee attack with your equipped weapon as a bonus action. But here's the thing, in Godfrey's second phase, he ditches his axe and just goes for straight hands. So we're going to do that too, using Enraged Throw, or regular throw. So when you get to, let's say, half your hit points with this build, you are going to rage, getting the frenzied options as a bonus action, and then you're just gonna throw your axe at somebody, disarming yourself and unleashing your full power, because with this build, your fists are going to be stronger than your axe, because again, the whole point is that you're deliberately nerfing yourself until you hit that second stage where you get to go all out, just like the boss fight itself. And Enraged Throw will allow you to do this as a bonus action. Now, unless you have a way of getting a second bonus action, which we will with this build, you won't be able to do Enraged Throw twice in a turn, so you'll most likely be raging, then using your regular throw, but your regular throw will still trigger extra attack, so you can immediately go into a punch right after the throw, closing in the distance quick, because you're going to be getting some, let's just say, advanced improved unarmored movement with this build. I mean, you can obviously guess where the multi-class is going. And then from then on, you become a grappler, wrestler, power bombing type, where you're grabbing people, throwing them, jumping across the arena. The only thing we don't necessarily get with this build is like Godfrey's shockwave attacks that he does, which are a pretty iconic part of his boss fight. So I will be kind of getting some options of how you could get something akin to that later, but for now, your phase transition is going to be Berserker Rage, throw your axe, start punching. So, let's go to the next level. Level 4 is going to give us our first feat, and you all saw this coming. If we're going to be punching with this build and we're running a strength character, we're picking up Tavern Brawler, allowing us to use that +1 to strength to round us out to an 18. Also, whenever we make an unarmed attack, use an improvised weapon or throw something, your strength modifier is added twice to the damage and attack rolls. This is just going to allow us to just do massive amounts of damage with both throwing and punching, making us the godly powerhouse that Godfrey actually is when we hit that second phase. For the progression of this build, I would recommend that you take level 5 of Barbarian here. This is going to give you improved movement as well as extra attack, making you a full martial fighter, and then going into our multi-class from 6th level onwards. However, once you're into Act 3 and you have enough levels, I would respec going multi-classing here at level 5 instead. So basically the way you're going to play this build throughout the game is to play Barbarian up to level 5, then multi-class and go the rest that way until you respec later, but for now I'm going to show the final build. So if you're playing this one, go to level 5 for Barbarian. But now we're going to jump into our subclass, multi-class even, and you all already knew what this was going to be. It's Monk. Because Godfrey turns into an unarmed fighter in his second phase, part of our phase transition, again, ditching the axe and going full unarmed strike power. Going with level 1 of Monk, we're going to get access to Flurry of Blows, which is great, even at this level, because we'll be able to do Tavern Brawler damage with this if you took it already, which you should have. You're going to get Unarmored Defense using your Wisdom, but we're going to be using Constitution for this instead. We're going to gain access to Dexterous Attacks, allowing our attacks with Monk weapons to use Dexterity instead of Strength if it's higher. Obviously, for us, it's not. But we are going to now have our Unarmed Strikes deal 1d4 bludgeoning damage, as well as be able to make bonus attack Unarmed Strikes. So, we throw our axe away, and all of a sudden, we now are a punching, grappling powerhouse, because again, now we're going to be able to throw as a bonus action and punch with our main action. It's going to be really, really strong. I mean, you guys have probably played throwing builds like this before, but the way we've managed to put the kind of flavor and the spin on it definitely makes this build special. Next up, at level 2 of Monk, we're going to gain access to unarmored movement. So now once we're kind of throwing our axe away, we're going to get some increased movement speed. Although I believe we get it anyway. I think it's only if you wear... oh yeah, if you're not wearing armor or using a shield. So it doesn't matter if you're wielding a two-handed weapon, because usually two-handed weapons aren't counted as Monk weapons, but of course for us, we don't care because our strength is higher anyway. Ignore me. We also gain access to Patient Defense and Step of the Wind, Dash, and Disengage. Probably not going to be using Dash or Disengage that much, but Patient Defense is actually really, really nice if you kind of want to maintain that first phase a bit longer. I did it for the sake of my combat footage, and again, it just prevents you from taking unnecessary damage when you don't want to. So if you are running a bit low on health and you want to make sure you're not taking too many hits, this is going to allow you to attack quite effectively, being able to dodge quite a lot of hits, because we get a lot of AC with this build. At Monk level 3, you're going to get to choose your subclass. Now, I would make an argument for Way of 4 Elements here, because again, in Godfrey's boss fight, he does gain shockwave attacks, basically where he stomps on the ground and is kind of able to like unleash kind of pulses like out from his body, which can knock you over and deal damage. So if you wanted to pick up things like Thunderwave and even Sphere of Elemental Balance for the Thunder aspect, where you're able to kind of do these like shockwaves that push people away as you're kind of fighting them, and again, because Way of the 4 Elements features don't actually count as spells, you can also use them while raging. This would work in both of our phases. So if you wanted to get a little bit more of like kind of a caster element to it, being able to do like thunder stuff, because you could get like basically this class's version of Shatter later on. And there's also an attack that Godfrey does where he kind of like pulls up the ground and does like a line of kind of like explosion damage, I guess. I mean, Fangs of the Fire Snake could be fun. Fist of Unbroken Air would be cool, but I don't think that's close enough to really justify it. If you want to have a bit more fun with it, absolutely go for it. You know, I've made Barbarian Monk builds in the past that are extremely fun. However, we're going to take kind of the power building option here, because I do think it works out better in the long run for the build, because it gives us a better phase 2 transition, and we're going to go with Way of the Open Hand. Way of the Open Hand is going to give us the ability to augment our Flurry of Blows to topple, stagger, or push enemies over. Topple is a great one because it can knock humanoid enemies prone, Flurry, or any enemy that can be knocked prone, but a lot of non-humanoid enemies resist prone anyway, so just be careful of that. Flurry of Blows Stagger, which can allow you to stagger targets, and staggering makes it so that they cannot take reactions. And finally, Flurry of Blows Push can push enemies away. These are all absolutely great. I mean, it's just more damage and a bit more utility out of one of our main damaging features. Next up at Monk level 4, we're going to gain resistance to fall damage, so all of that high-flying jumping tactics that we're going to be doing with Monk aren't going to do as much damage to us. We're also going to get access to another feat. Now, obviously, there is some optimization you could be doing here. If you grabbed the Potion of Everlasting Vigor, you would not need to bump your strength up to 20 with an ability score improvement. You would just have it at 20 already, and you could put that into other things, maybe Wisdom, for example. Or, if you wanted to, you could technically grab, where is it, Great Weapon Master. But I think, and while that would make your axe phase a lot more powerful, it kind of defeats the purpose of the build. Again, you are supposed to be weaker in your first phase, getting that true power once you hit your second. So while Great Weapon Master would make the build overall stronger, and you can absolutely slot it into this build, especially if you did pick up the Potion of Everlasting Vigor, I do feel like it kind of goes against the spirit of things. But again, it would work perfectly for this build. You have Reckless Attack, meaning that you can offset the penalty pretty much for free. So that's entirely up to you if you wanted to go down that route. I can also see Athlete being a good thing to pick up here. Maybe if you organised your stats differently, maybe if you dropped those wisdom points and put a 15 in dex, you can bump it up to a 16 here and gain increased jump distance, but I personally don't think that's worth it. Mobile can also be a good one if you want more movement speed, absolutely can work. I could also see Savage Attacker being quite nice for this build, but I think that only works with the first phase because it's melee weapon attacks. Let me know if that works with unarmed strikes. I'm not entirely sure. There's a ton of things you could do with this build. I am personally going to be taking ability score improvements because I kind of want to get both strength and constitution to 20, which if I use both ability score improvements, we'll be able to do with this build. But again, using things like the Potion of Everlasting Vigor or the Mirror of Loss, or heck, even just giant strength potions if you really wanted to go that route, you could optimize this build a lot more. But again, I like to make my builds kind of easy to access for most people, especially if you're kind of newer to the game, and even though we are doing some complex shenanigans, it actually is a pretty simple build at the end of the day. So, ability score improvement, and I think we're going to bump up our strength to 20 first. Next up, at Monk level 5, we are going to gain access to extra attacks. So again, total level 9 is probably where I would respec this character, because now at this point you would gain extra attack from Monk, so we no longer need it from Barbarian. So I would say once you're at this level, total level 9, you're going to respec then. So now we do gain access to a few things, extra attack like I said, as well as Stunning Strike, which is just great, because if you're able to stun your target, they cannot take actions, bonus actions, or reactions, which is very, very dangerous, and the fact that we get to attack so many times in a turn makes this pretty strong. Next up, at Monk level 6, we're going to gain access to a ton of open hand features that are going to take this build's power to the next level. We're going to gain even more unarmored movement. Now our key empowered strikes allow our unarmed strikes to overcome resistance and immunity to non-magical damage. So that means we're going to be able to punch through the defenses of people who are resistant to physical damage, which is great. We're also going to get these subclass features that do manifestation of body, mind, and soul. Unfortunately, our wisdom is not high enough to get any bonuses out of this. However, like I said, if you optimized a bit further, perhaps if you went with strength potions, or maybe you could dump con and pick up the Amulet of Greater Health in Act 3, then you could put more of those points into wisdom to make this a bit stronger. Again, this build is not 100% optimized, there is room for improvement, but this is just a basic framework for you guys to work off of with this concept. So again, if you wanted to kind of respec when you have high level equipment or such like that, you could put some points into wisdom and make this a bit stronger, because these manifestations do a base d4 of radiant, psychic, or necrotic damage plus your wisdom modifier. So because our wisdom modifier is at 0, it's only going to do an extra d4 of damage, and because Godfrey is attached to the Golden Order, which is all about the grace of gold and holy damage and all that, it makes 100% sense to bring radiant damage with manifestation of soul using this build. And finally, the next part of our phase transition. This can either be an augment to your phase 2 transition, or you could make it a phase 3 transition. Wholeness of Body is going to heal you for a bit of hit points equal to like your monk level plus a little bit, I forget the exact calculation, but it also allows you to regain half your key points instantly. Then you enter a temporary state of wholeness where you regain 1 key point per turn and have an extra bonus action for 3 turns, which means even you gain basically like this burst kind of 3 rounds of combat where you just get to go absolutely crazy with even more throws, even more attacks. You could, again, I personally used it as part of the phase 2 transition to get a little bit of healing back and feel like that initial transformation is really, really strong. So you could go with that. That's what I did in the combat footage. Or if you want to use this when you have a little bit lower HP as like a phase 3, then you absolutely can, where you basically go for one like desperate all-out assault towards the end with that extra bonus action and regain some of your resources back, so you can just basically use all of your monk features without a care in the world. I personally really like this. I think it gives you this, again, this kind of like idea of you getting stronger as the fight goes on, as you lose more HP. I love it. You feel like a true warrior with this build. Next up, at Monk level 7, we're going to gain access to more key points as well as evasion, meaning that if a spell or effect would deal half damage on a successful dex saving throw, it deals no damage if you succeed and only half damage if you fail, making you even more tanky against that spell damage. As well as we gain Stillness of Mind. If we're charmed or frightened, we automatically cast Stillness of Mind to remove the condition, which is just a nice feature to have. And finally, at Monk level 8, we're going to be getting our final feat of the build. I went for a full 8 split here specifically so we could get 3 feats, which gives you a bit more room to play around with this build, especially again with those minor optimizations. So getting 3 ability score improvements is quite nice, but it's entirely up to you if you kind of want to pick up, you know, other stuff. Maybe you want to get those double bonus actions all the time and have Wholeness of Body be 3 bonus actions, in which case you could pick up 3 levels of Thief Rogue. Feel free to kind of tweak this one as you like. But I personally just, again, kind of liked getting more Monk levels because it gives us more key points overall to fuel those actions a bit more, as well as, you know, I just like kind of having access to 3 feats because, again, it just gives you a bit more room for customization with this build. But as I said, feel free to take Thief Rogue levels. 2 levels of Fighter could also be really nice for that Action Surge. Imagine combining Action Surge with Wholeness of Body, you'd have a massive Nova round of damage. I mean, I can't think of too many more that I would say would be absolutely great for this build. Probably Fighter and Rogue would be kind of my choices. But anyways, for that final feat, again, I'm just going to keep it quite simple. I'm going to pick up an ability score improvement and bump up our Constitution to an 18. And that is the build. What you're going to be getting out of this, like I say, is a really strong fighter. Again, you deliberately make yourself slightly weaker in the first phase, but not weak enough that it's not even worth having, because your axe is still going to do a lot of damage. That base D12 is quite nice, as well as the fact that you'll be able to do extra attacks and all that sort of thing. It will feel pretty basic at the start, but you will still have quite a lot of maneuverability, since we still get those monk maneuverability features, as well as some of the equipment that we're going to be using that is going to bump up that playstyle. Again, if you wanted to make that part of the build a bit more powerful, feel free to get the Potion of Everlasting Vigor and sub out that strength increase for Great Weapon Master. But again, in my opinion, that kind of defeats the purpose. But again, make this build as powerful as you like. The world is your oyster, do what you want. So, let's get into the equipment, because again, this is where the build really starts to come into its own. So, obviously, for a lot of this, I did go for like fashion options to try and get as close to Godfrey as possible. Unfortunately, it's really hard to do since there's no straight up like grey dye and his armor's kind of grey. So I decided to go for like kind of a more brownish look, which he does have like a brown fur waistcoat on. So this was just as close as I can get. And the gold accents can kind of reference the Golden Order, but again, unfortunately not that close to Godfrey in terms of looks, but the inspiration is definitely there. I think mechanically we've got it down. Looks-wise, maybe not so much. But anyways, so for the equipment, for the axe, I wanted to get an axe that was still decent, but still kind of had the same general silhouette as Godfrey's greataxe, so I've gone for the bloodied greataxe. Whenever the wielder has less than 50% of their hit points remaining, they deal an additional 1d4 of slashing damage. So in the early game, this is quite a good axe as well. You can use it throughout the whole game. Maybe you might want to buff it up with the Drakethroat Glaive, if you are going to take it into Act 3, if you want to keep the cosplay as accurate as possible. And again, it kind of gives you like a soft phase too in the early game, because again, once you reach less than half HP, you start dealing a bit more damage with this one, which is quite cool. So again, it feels like a great axe for the early game, which is where you get it. But if you don't care about keeping the axe as accurate as possible, I actually recommend picking up the Defender greataxe later on. This is one I've not really featured on the channel before, but I actually really like it for this build, because it comes with its own unique effect. It's got this ability called Defensive Attack. Now this is normally a +2 weapon, but when making your first attack of the round, you can reduce this weapon's enchantment by 1, making it only a +1 weapon, to increase your armor class and saving throw bonus by 1. So basically you can trade a point of damage and accuracy for a point of defense and saving throws. And I think that's really cool. It almost gives you like that kind of option, and again, it can almost feel phase transition-y if you decide to use it, because if you decide to go all out kind of in your first phase, giving you a bit of extra protection, that could be kind of fun. Again, it's just more mechanics to play with, and again, I've never really featured this one on the channel before, but I quite like it here. However, I would probably stick with the Bloodied greataxe because it just feels a bit more on theme for the build to me, personally, and it's the one I used in testing. So technically, this build wasn't even at full power when I was testing. I really was holding back, just like the boss. So, next up, the Headband. Godfrey does wear a circlet, so I've gone with the Scabby Pugilist Circlet. Your weapon and unarmed strikes deal an additional 2 damage while you're surrounded by 2 or more foes, so it works both in our first phase and our second phase. for basically just giving us a bit more damage of all of our attacks when we're surrounded by enemies. And if you run into this build with this build solo like I do, or you go running in to take most of the hits, then this will be happening quite a lot, so you're going to get off this bonus fairly consistently. So that is definitely the fashion option. This is an Act 3 option though, and I kind of thought this would be earlier in the game, but no, apparently not. So I've got an early game option for you here, which is the Haste Helm, which you can get right at the start of the game, and it's just going to give you more movement speed, which for a melee tanking build is very, very nice to have. However, if you wanted to go for a pure power option for this build that isn't just for the fashion, grab the Bone Spike Helmet. When you rage, so when you enter your phase 2, everyone around you in a 3 meter radius has to make, or hostile creatures I should say, have to make a wisdom save or take 2 to 8 psychic damage. They receive half damage on a save. It gives you a +2 to intimidation, which is nice for a barbarian, and it would also augment your first phase by giving you access to menacing attack, which does a little bit of extra damage and can possibly frighten targets. Normally this is exclusive to Battlemaster fighters or people who take the Fighting Initiate feat, but we get it for free without having to spend resources on it. So it's just more free damage with an added effect, so this can make your first phase a bit stronger. So if you're going for a power building option, I would absolutely recommend this helm. But I would hide it. Definitely hide it. So that's my recommendation if you're building for pure power. Next up, Godfrey does have a flowing blue cloak, so I picked up the Cloak of Protection for a +1 to armor class and saving throws, and because I think it works quite nicely with the fashion that we're going for. Next up, a staple of pretty much every barbarian build, we have the Enraging Heart Garb. Now, I did originally try to use medium armor on this build, and you absolutely could if you wanted to, just know that that won't synergize with our monk features as well, but none of them really looked close to Godfrey's armor, and ironically enough, this was the closest, so the best option is still the best option for both fashion and otherwise. Again, not really a grey kind of dye. There is like the black and white dye, but it made it more black than grey, and it didn't really look right to me. I mean, in fact, I can just bloody show you, because I've dyed this in muddy red, but I can show you kind of what it looks like here. I mean, in my personal opinion, I don't think that looks very good, but if you think that's closer to the original, then by all means. But I went with the muddy red dye because I personally prefer it. But I did keep the braces here and the boots coloured in Harlequin Black and White because I felt like those were actually pretty close. So yeah, with the Enraging Heart Garb, you're going to be able to, while raging, generate 2 turns of Wrath, basically giving you even more damage with melee weapons. Unfortunately, that's not going to work with our unarmed strikes, and this feature itself is actually bugged at the moment, but if you wanted to still use your axe in Act 2, in Phase 2 even, I should say, for whatever reason, then this would buff it up once this feature gets fixed. However, the main thing that we're here for is a +2 to Constitution, meaning that with this build we now have 20 Constitution and 20 Strength, giving us a massive 133 hit point HP pool, as well as being not really having to sacrifice too many more points somewhere else. Overall, I think this is one of the kind of better things we can pick up, and I just noticed the accents have turned grey instead of gold. Ah, that's that combination of dyes working for me again. In fact, that looks a lot more accurate now. Huh. Well, there you go. I surprise myself sometimes. Anyways, on to the next step, the Braces of Defense, obtainable right in Act 1. Godfrey does wear braces, and a lot of the other kind of options that you would normally pick for Monk Barbarian throwing builds are, like, for example, the gloves that uninhibited Kashigo, or any of the gloves that give you an extra d4 of, like, an element on your attacks. They didn't quite look right, again, for the fashion that I was going for, so I've gone with the Braces of Defense, and a +2 bonus to our armor class, as long as we're not wearing armor or holding a shield, so again, it's basically giving us shield AC, even though we're wielding a two-handed weapon. I'm not going to say no. It looks great for what I'm trying to go for here fashion-wise, as well as just giving us a great boost to our stats. However, of course, the gloves of uninhibited Kashigo would give you a 1d4 bonus to your throwing attacks, which would obviously make those a bit more powerful. And any of the kind of like I said, unarmed strike buffing gloves would also work. However, if I was to pick one of those, unarmed strike boosting gloves, I would probably pick the ones that add force damage, because that just makes the most sense, getting extra force damage on our attacks rather than something elemental, because Godfrey's not really about elemental attacks, so I would pick up the Act 3 option of grabbing the force. I believe they're called the Servitors of the Black Hands, yeah, and they add force damage. So either that, or the Gloves of Uninhibited Kashigo, which are also in Act 1. Entirely up to you, but I think the Braces of Defense work the best for this build that I'm trying to make today. But again, Optimize and change this build as you see fit. And finally, the Bone Spike Boots. Again, Godfrey has this thing about jumping around the arena and stomping on his foes, and the Bone Spike Boots are going to allow us to do that and more. We gain a +1 bonus to our armor class and saving throws while not wearing armor or holding a shield. Perfect. That's going to bring us to a total of 21 AC with all of our buffs, which is great. We also gain an increased jump distance. Great. With our high strength, we're going to have a massive amount of distance that we can leap, as well as giving us an alternate jump, Brutal Leap, which allows us to jump at a target and possibly knock it prone. And of course, enemy that's prone on the floor means advantage for us and all of our allies, and they have to spend their movement speed to get up, meaning that it's easier for us to chase them down. So overall, this just made too much sense not to include on this build. I know a lot of this build is kind of standard barbarian affair, but that's just kind of what Godfrey is at his core. Again, this build is more about the actual unique way that we use the mechanics to do a phase transition, rather than, you know, just trying to come up with something that is mechanically complex. Godfrey is a guy who just fights, and he fights hard and well, and we do the same. Next up for our accessories, we have the Sentient Amulet. This works on 2 levels. Number 1, Key Restoration, allowing us to once per long rest restore a number of key points equal to our martial arts die. For us, that's a D8, so we can recover, I believe, 8 key points, which is pretty damn strong. You get a weaker version of this in Act 1 that restores half your martial arts die, and then you can upgrade it in Act 3 to this version. This also will give us access to Shatter, which is a 4d8 thunder damage spell at level 2, which damages all nearby creatures and objects, and creatures made of inorganic materials such as stone or steel, like with steel watches, have disadvantage on the save. This is awesome because this gives us a once per long rest use of one of Godfrey's shockwave attacks. So it's a fun little way to kind of, you know, get that little bit of extra flavour in here without having to go 4 elements monk. So in my opinion, this worked on every level, but it is a free slot, swap it out for whatever. Next up, the Ring of Flinging. Boosts our throwing damage by 1d4. Again, if you wanted to, you can stack this with the uninhibited Kashigo gloves to make this a 2d4. And finally, this is kind of a throwaway slot, but the Shadowcloaked ring does work on both of our phases. Both our weapon and unarmed attacks will deal an additional 1d4 of damage on lightly or heavily obscured creatures or creatures made of shadow. Great for Act 2, which is where you get this ring, as well as most enemies will be in lightly or heavily at least lightly obscured, as long as they're standing in like the shade of a building, or if you're just kind of inside and there's not a significant source of light around like a torch. So this will trigger much more than you would otherwise think. However, you can swap this out for whatever you like. I would say that if you wanted to get another kind of like 3rd or even 4th phase, depending on how you're playing this build, you could do what I did with the Bloodborne build and grab the After Death Do Us Part ring in Act 3, which would allow you to, whenever you go down, you would be able to get back up with half your HP. However, you are possessed by Shadow Possession, meaning that you lose control of your character, so be aware of that. Or, as well, you could pick up in Act 1 the Psionic Power Awakened, or not Awakened, what's it called, Survival Instinct for completing Omelium's quest in Act 1, which would give you the ability to once per long rest when you go down, you get back up with, I think it's 3d4 of HP, which is pretty cool. That would be another way of kind of like being like, I ain't finished yet, so... And again, it could also kind of work as a way to transition into like a 3rd phase if you wanted to kind of take it up another level. But yeah, that's kind of the build. Oh, I will say, as we already kind of stated, this build isn't... I guess this build has died. Like, I guess the armor is a combination of the Harlequin black and white and black and white and a muddy red dye, and the boots and gloves are coloured in muddy red, with the cape being boreal blue. So yeah, those are your dyes. And yes, that is the build. Overall, really proud of this one. I know at the end of the day, it's a pretty basic build, but again, there's room for augmentation and improvement where you so desire. Oh, I just realised, early game boots option, the Swiry shoes, which give you an increased jump distance of 1.5 meters and a +1 to your acrobatics. There you go. Forgot to mention it. Not going to stop the combat footage to bring it up. But yes, I think this build overall, despite being simple, has a lot of room for optimization and improvement if you really, really wanted to go down that route and get deep into the mechanics, as well as you could pull out, you know, a couple of multi-classes here with Thief, Rogue, or Fighter to just get a bit more if you really wanted to. But overall, I think with 3 feats and a lot of room to play around, and the fact that this build just works, man. It's powerful, it's tanky, it does a lot of damage, and all the more importantly, it gets that absolutely brilliant phase 2 transition, spot on. In my Bloodborne build, we obviously had 3 phases, one where we did the Barbarian Rage to get Tiger's Bloodlust for more bleed, and then obviously the Slayer transformation towards the end for a 3rd phase, but this one kind of gets something similar just in its own way, almost a more respectful way, because again with Bloodborne it's all about corruption and madness and letting the beast take over, but with Godfrey, he's just like, I have a beast specifically to keep me in check, and then I'm going to get rid of that to just beat the shit out of you with my bare hands and just throw you into the air and suplex you again. Godfrey's fight in Elden Ring is absolutely amazing. So the idea of this, like literally being you fight with an axe, you're fighting fair, you're fighting like a warrior, to then be put into a desperate situation where you just say, fuck this limitation, and fuck you, and just throw the damn thing away and start throwing hands, just grabbing, throwing, slamming people into the ground, punching them over and over again, and also stunning strike and patient defense and all that extra stuff, jumping on them to knock them prone. You're gonna go from being like a noble axe-fighting warrior to a freaking wrestler. It's amazing. I'm super, super proud of this build. I absolutely love how it turned out. And again, wholeness of body can either work to augment your phase 2 transition or give you a phase 3 where you go completely all out for a short amount of time. Overall, I love this build. It's one of my favorites I've done. I'm loving this kind of boss battle concept. Definitely going to try and do this with more of the classes, see if maybe I can get like a warlock boss battle or something like that in the future. But anyways, that is going to do it for me. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.